Alrighty then, this is my first response to a video that I managed to salvage over a year ago. It was by the late Zaid Magenta. It was his passionate ripping apart of Mass Effect 3, and there are a few bits and pieces here and there that I disagree with, but in most areas, he is definitely taking the words right out of my mouth. And I love his passionate delivery and his inability to stutter the way I do. Unfortunately, I do stutter a lot and I run shortness of breath, and I unfortunately cough a lot, as you've probably heard from my previous videos. Anyway, let's see. Oh yeah, by the way, he's back. Now he's Diaz Diaz Station. I remember, yeah, Diaz Station. And now that he's back in town, I feel motivated to make responses to his videos. After he disappeared, he fell off the grid over a year ago. I was lucky to be able to, through the archive, find and salvage his video, and I split it up into 10 parts so it's easier to find, easier to follow. Alright, so let's go.
Mass Effect 3 and the many...
Oh, and by the way, please hit the like and subscribe button, and go and watch his videos. Please and thank you.
Mass Effect 3 and the many ways it failed to stick the landing in one of the most disappointing and most infamous moments in video game history. But first, what is Mass Effect?
Oh yes, it was the day that a certain group of fans baked 1,000 cupcakes. I don't know how many. It was 333 of one color, green, blue, and red of each color. I don't know what the bonus one was, but yeah, it was. And those cupcakes got donated to charity by BioWare, but BioWare never recovered fully from it.
Even if you've never played it, chances are you've at least heard of it. Back when BioWare wasn't a steaming pile of trash, Mass Effect was a universally acclaimed role-playing series. You take the role of Commander Shepard in a futuristic sci-fi space opera, teaming up with several aliens to fight a looming threat in the form of the Reapers. At first it sounds like your usual save the galaxy kind of that trash. Mass Effect was a universally acclaimed role-playing series. You take the role of Commander Shepard in a futuristic sci-fi space opera, teaming up with several aliens to fight a looming...
Okay, I'm sorry that I had to rewind it, because it didn't pause in the nick of time. Notice how every Reaper has got a different shape. I mean, granted, they all follow more or less a similar shape, but they're all unique. And this is one of the countless ways that I felt Mass Effect 3 was a failure in my book, which unfortunately Diaz doesn't point out. That every Reaper, there's two classes: the smaller Destroyer Reapers and the bigger Sovereign class Reapers. And every big Reaper in Mass Effect 3 looks exactly the same. It looks exactly like Sovereign / Harbinger. And yet here you can see different shapes. And yeah, that's what I was looking forward to, but I was disappointed.
Threat in the form of the Reapers. At first it sounds like your usual save the galaxy kind of stuff, except for one crucial detail that drastically separates it from the rest of the genre: the dialogue wheel. Mass Effect was one of those games where you could customize the personality of your character in any way you wanted them to act.
See, a lot of people who bashed the wheel did so because they figured, and correctly so, unfortunately, that the verbal results, the dialogue results, would be exactly the same, and indeed they are. The dialogue, the choice of words, are indeed the same in plenty of instances. However, the tone is different. Sure, you're going to be forced to say yes whether you like it or not, but you can either say yes gladly or yes in a very reluctant way, like you don't want to, but you accept the job, something like that. So yeah, the dialogue wheel does matter, even in the first game.
Through authentic decision-making and player choice, you can increase your charisma to unlock additional dialogue options and obtain dozens of different outcomes that drastically change the story. You could freely interact with your crew and even develop a romantic relationship with one of them. The game also had an extremely massive open world where you can engage in all sorts of side quests that acted as mini stories of their own. You'd come across all sorts of side characters, and the game gives you a lot of fun ways to interact with them. Granted, there have been video games like this that existed before Mass Effect came out, but
as for his mentioning of that we can romance one person, it's realistic, and I understand that BioWare is trying to be realistic sometimes, but other times they go off the deep end and go extremely unrealistic in the name of political correctness. But if you're going to go politically correct, then why not include, Why not give us the option to form harems? Sure, that may sound like something a teenage boy will fantasize about, but I'm serious. The point of a role-playing game is to temporarily divorce ourselves from reality, to live in a fantasy world. So perhaps realism is not such a good idea. Anyway, sorry about that.
But Mass Effect took these mechanics and revolutionized them, in a way that very few video game franchises have. I loved the hundreds of different ways I can interact with my squad mates, the different characteristics I could give Shepard, the ways my choices impacted the world and the outcome of the story.
Please forgive the piss poor quality. Every time the video gets salvaged, the resolution gets worse and worse, so yeah.
I can interact with my squad mates, the different characteristics I could give Shepard, the ways my choices impacted the world and the outcome of the story, and I also loved the world building. If I could describe Mass Effect in one sentence, it would be Lord of the Rings in space. The lore, mythology, the dozens of different races, all the different cultures, and how the different galactic civilizations interacted with each other was so captivating. It was one of the few times where I actually wanted to learn more about this world that I was exploring because it was so rich and had so much to offer.
Absolutely. Amen. I remember when I first bought this game, I was looking for games because I was bored with Fable and certain other role-playing games that weren't really role-playing because not much of the world has changed and my choices didn't matter because I either spared someone's life or killed them, and if I killed them, they're dead forever. But if I spared them, they would walk away and disappear anyway, so it didn't matter at all, except a few morality points that I could easily undo by donating money to a charity or something. I wanted choices that actually mattered, and I also didn't want fade to black when it came to the romance scenes. Sorry about the interruption there. I hope you can still hear me. I'm away from my desk letting my dog out. Of all times to interrupt me while I'm working. Anyway, yeah, Lord of the Rings in space. Amen. Another good comparison, like I've done a million times before, would be Avatar: The Last Airbender. I was madly in love with that universe, and then Legend, of course, screwed it all over. And, yeah, I have a passionate love for Avatar. Absolutely despise Korra. Just like I have a passionate love for Lord of the Rings, but despise Rings of Power.
And as you can imagine, when the sequel came out, I was hooked right into it. I would play these games over and over when I was younger, and I purchased all the DLC to get the entire complete story.
Oh, yeah, and I forgot to mention more on what he was saying. When I first played Mass Effect, I saw a trailer for Mass Effect 2, and I thought, hot dog, this thing's got realistic graphics, it's in space, has choices, and has sex in it that doesn't fade to black necessarily. I'll check it out, but I believe in starting the story from the beginning, so I bought Mass Effect 1. I immediately hated it for its, it's the fact that it's not first person, it's all third person, and I hated the combat, but the story kept me glued, and I grew to love it within hours. I even got lost on the Citadel for 2 hours trying to find Tali. Tali actually died twice before I was able to rescue her because I didn't know where to go. It was a funny story that way. Anyway, going on.
From Bring Down the Sky to the Lair of the Shadow Broker to The Arrival, I synced dozens, no, hundreds of hours into the Mass Effect series. It became one of my favorite video game franchises of all time. That is, until after I completed Mass Effect 3 and I ended up feeling nothing. Absolutely nothing. And after all the time I invested in this series, that just made it hurt a lot more. There's a lot of people who will say that the game was good up until the ending, but upon further investigation, that is not the case.
I actually felt nothing, or actually I felt worse than nothing. I felt infuriated at Mass Effect 3 before I ever got to the ending. Within minutes of the game starting, I realized something was off, and he'll explain more later, but he had to replay the game in order to see it. I saw it on the very first time I played it. For me, the infamous ending, was just the final nail in the coffin. But go on, Diaz.
More. There's a lot of people who will say that the game was good up until the ending, but upon further investigation, that is not the case. Now, the thing about Mass Effect 3 is that because of the hundreds of different outcomes and choices based on decisions you made in the first 2 games, there's a lot of alterations to cutscenes. Obviously, I'm not gonna go over every single one, otherwise this video would be like a decade long, and with a huge amount of cutscenes already there due to side quests and returning characters, that would just be too much. For the sake of this video, I'm only going to go over the main components of the story to talk about the most vital elements that make it fail. I might bring up some things in between, but I mostly want to focus on the main campaign. Now before I begin, it's important that I bring up a number of things since I know this is what everyone is going to be quote mining. EA was forcing BioWare to work the game on a tight schedule, which resulted in it being rushed, not getting the extra year of development it needed. And since EA is notorious for being, well, EA, I'm willing to believe that's what happened. However, there have also been interviews with people who worked on the game saying EA was fair and that they were given the time they needed to work on the game's story.
Exactly. I got sick and tired of brown nosers always telling me that it's all EA's fault, that they got rushed, and that's why the game's unfinished. It wasn't the unfinished parts that made me mad about Mass Effect 3. It was how they now infected my space adventure with modern-day political propaganda and, more importantly, horrible, unrespectable villains. And, of course, the fact that they chickened out and redid the ending, the Priority Earth mission, within the last 2 weeks of production simply because somebody leaked the script. That's stupid. Bad decision. And it's not EA's fault. It's BioWare's fault.
This has caused a divide between people who put the blame on EA and those who put the blame on BioWare. Well, regardless of whose fault it is, that doesn't change the quality of the final product.
That is another thing. Look up the trope on tvtropes.com. Look up the trope Doyleist versus Watsonian. The Watsonian... Doyleist is the guy who wrote the Sherlock Holmes books, and Watsonian is, of course, the doctor who goes with Sherlock. Now, when a change to the canon happens, or when a stupid decision or a questionable decision happens, some people blame the author. Those are called Doyleists. Other people blame the characters within the story for the bad decision, and those are called the Watsonians. Like, whose fault is it that the Normandy is a complete mess in the third game? The Watsonian would blame the Alliance for taking the ship apart and wasting valuable time putting it back together, instead of just leaving it as it was. Whereas the Doyleists, like myself, blame BioWare for that stupid decision to completely ruin the ship, leaving it a mess, full of empty, wasted spaces and wires hanging down all around, etc., etc.
Needless to say, it's not very good. There's a lot of people who believe that the story was good up until the ending, and I don't blame anyone who may feel that way. The hype for this game was extremely massive, and after all the time people invested in the first 2 games, you wouldn't want to believe that it was for nothing. But now that it's years later, and the hype for this game has died out, it's made the huge problems with the narrative more and more apparent. Now, it's not like I'm the first person in the world to have problems with Mass Effect 3's story outside the ending, but it's definitely more widely agreed upon that the story was good throughout and that the ending was just a small dent in an otherwise flawless car. And don't get me wrong, Mass Effect 3 does have some very well written moments, some of them even being the best in the trilogy. But when you look at the entirety of the story as one collective entity instead of just separating the parts you don't like from the ones you do like, it falls apart. Just going by my own example, my favorite thing about Mass Effect 3's story is the character arc of Javik. There's no arguing with me, he's just the best character in the game. But this is probably just because they ended up downplaying the rest of your squad. James Vega is a forgettable, boring, run-of-the-mill blank slate. I've been around the Mass Effect community, and whenever people talk about their favorite squad mates, James is never even mentioned.
I've seen him mentioned, but extremely rarely. When I first played the game, I've only played as male Shepard. I tried playing as female Shepard, but I couldn't help but quit after an hour of gameplay because I just cannot get into character playing as a woman. I just don't, I just can't. I have no idea. Oh man, I think I'm under the weather. It's raining outside and it's gotten really damp and my lungs don't go well with humidity. But anyway, let's see. Well, I tried role-playing as a woman, but I just can't. I have no idea how to remove reason and accountability from my persona, but that's another story. I thought James Vega was put there simply to compensate FemShep for her lack of good romance options, because BioWare really threw hetero FemShep under the bus. Her romance options, she's only got 4 romance options. They consist of a boring beta male, that's Kaidan, that nobody really cares for. And let's see, there's the cheater, Jacob, you. And of course, there's Thane, who's terminally ill, so he's doomed to die in one way or another, and his skin is toxic. And of course, there's Garrus, and everybody loves Garrus, myself included. But he can't give her biological children if she wants any, so BioWare kind of threw her under the bus, and I figured James Vega was put there to compensate, and then it turns out he's not a romance option for her at all, so he's just dead weight. He's a dead weight character. Pointless to add. Perhaps he was added in to finally represent Latinos? I do not know. But I find him a dead weight character. Basically a Krogan wannabe, which a lot of people agree. Anyway.
Half the time I forgot he was even a character in the game until he appeared on screen, and as soon as he leaves, I completely forget about him. He does absolutely nothing to stand out from the rest of your squad, and you don't even have the option to romance him. Even when you do get the chance to romance him in the Citadel DLC, his character is so badly established that you even wonder why you even bother.
And of course, to make matters worse, the Citadel DLC, like Mass Effect 3, is full of auto-dialogue. And auto-dialogue is in itself bad because it feels like, the character's talking without your permission. But more importantly is when he makes decisions without your permission. Femshep and James agree to not talk about the sex they had after the party without the player's consent. What if she wanted to go on? But no, they retcon her choice. They don't allow the player to decide the opposite.
The Virmire survivor, whether it's Kaidan or Ashley, is absent for a huge chunk of the first 2/3 of the game. You briefly meet up with them on Earth, talk to them a couple of times on Mars, and then they immediately get incapacitated by Dr. Eva. You get the option to briefly talk to them once before the Citadel mission, then you're given the option to kill them during the coup, and if they survive, you're actually given...
Dude, it's pronounced coup, not coupe. It's French. Sheesh. Like the coup de grace.
With them on Earth, talk to them a couple of times on Mars, and then they immediately get incapacitated by Dr. Eva. You get the option to briefly talk to them once before the Citadel mission, then you're given the option to kill them during the coup, and if they survive, you're actually given the option to either take them or not include them in your squad. And if you decide to bring them along, they pretty much do nothing of significance unless you romance them. It feels like BioWare had no idea what to do with the Virmire survivor. They're absent for a huge chunk of the game, and
to be fair, BioWare made the stupid decision to replace many of the critical writers for the game, including Ashley's writer, which is why Ashley feels like an empty character unless you romance her, because it's painfully clear that her new writer didn't know what to do with her.
Include them in your squad, and if you decide to bring them along, they pretty much do nothing of significance unless you romance them. It feels like BioWare had no idea what to do with the Virmire survivor. They're absent for a huge chunk of the game, and whenever they appear, they don't really do anything. It makes you wonder why they're even in the game at all. Tali is more or less an advisor for the Quarians during the Rannoch arc. Her story begins and ends during this portion of the game. You can interact with her more if you romanced her, otherwise she's just along for the ride. Garrus is here and he's always fun to interact with, but with the emphasis on the Galactic War, he feels more like a side character than a main player. Even Liara feels severely downplayed when you put her in perspective. I mean, she's the Shadow Broker, the most powerful information broker in the galaxy. It's a huge step for her character after the DLC. You'd think this would play a pivotal role in the story, but nope. The fact that Liara is the Shadow Broker is never brought into play. You don't use her resources to complete side quests, and you can't use her resources to help maintain loyalty between different races. They do so little to utilize Liara's new position that you wonder why she was even made the Shadow Broker in the first place. They try to give her this low point moment where she's broken up over the fall of Thessia, except this doesn't make any sense. Liara had no personal relationship with Thessia. She never held it in high regard throughout the series. She was an infert archaeologist who preferred to be on her own with her studies.
Exactly, and that's what I don't understand. The bootlickers, the ass-kissers, the brown-nosers of BioWare, who say this game is just fine, they insist that it totally makes sense that Liara wants to go down on the planet simply because it's her homeworld. Except, as you pointed out, she doesn't have an emotional attachment. I don't have an emotional attachment to planet Earth, and I freaking live on it, which is one of the reasons why I identified as a colonist when playing this game. And I couldn't stand how Shepard constantly talked about taking Earth back. Dude, I'm a colonist. I don't care about Earth. Screw Earth. Let it burn. We have plenty of humans still out in space who can bring humanity back. And as for Liara being a shadow broker, well, yeah, there's at least 2, probably even 3 instances where Samantha totally steals her fire. Moments where the shadow broker should have tipped us off about Cerberus's tricks. It's instead Samantha. Very stupid. Very stupid.
Why does she suddenly have an emotional attachment to Thessia? Hell, she's more broken up about the fall of Thessia than she was about her mother being indoctrinated and forced to kill her.
Another thing, and I'll tell you, I'll spoil it ahead. My personal theory as to why we're forced to bring Liara, the real reason why we're forced to bring Liara on the temple mission, is so that, well, I probably explained it to you in previous videos, but I'll say it again in case you missed it. The space ninja, Kai Lang, is going to throw Liara at our other squad mate. He needs somebody light enough to throw. So if we took James Vega and, say, Krogan with us, he would not have, he would not be able to throw them as much. He needs someone light enough to throw, so we're forced to take Liara whether we like it or not. And of course, we're not allowed to have a Krogan squad mate at all, because whoever Liara gets thrown at needs to fall over and be incapacitated. And of course, there's that third reason. Why are we not allowed to take heavy weapons with us? Well, so that Mass Effect 3 has a convenient excuse to not let us shoot down his stupid gunship.
We'll get more into this later, but putting all this emphasis on Liara being sad about losing Thessia is a bizarre and confusing writing decision. There is one very well-written scene.
It makes sense when you consider the fact that the writers got replaced.
But putting all this emphasis on Liara being sad about losing Thessia is a bizarre and confusing writing decision. There is one very well-written scene where she and Shepard talk about the legacy and the importance of what we leave behind when we eventually die, but aside from that, I can't really think of any significant role she plays unless you choose to romance her. The way the majority of your squad is portrayed in this game just feels very absent-minded, considering the first 2 games gave them a more important role and variety of options to interact with them. You can interact with them more frequently if you talk to them while visiting on the Citadel, but it feels like a chore with how boring and repetitive it is to navigate. Back on the subject at hand, Javik was the most intriguing and worthwhile addition to your squad. It may seem like a no-brainer since it's the only time you get to interact with a Prothean, but as you spend more time with him you get to see more complexity to his character. He was a soldier raised and bred by war who never got to live a normal life. Spending his entire life surrounded by violence and survival caused him to develop a pessimistic view on the galaxy, and having lost everything he tried and failed to protect, not even having anyone left to relate to his situation since he's the last Prothean has only made him more cold. As you interact with Javik more, you get to develop a more intricate relationship with him as a fellow soldier, and you see there's more to his personality than being a cold-hearted warrior. He's a troll. He has a monotone sense of humor. He has a more compassionate side that you help him express more openly. And he grows to develop a meaningful camaraderie with Liara. The way he refers to her by name instead of calling her Asari shows how he's learned to see primitives for what they're capable of instead of what evolution forced on them. He expresses a desire to understand what peace feels like after the war is over, overcoming the trauma of what he experienced during the previous cycle, and along the way he learns about the value of empathy, kindness, and understanding.
Unfortunately, as a Paragon, I allowed him to touch the Prothean shard because I wanted him to revisit his memories, but I regretted that when it turns out he's going to go to the graveyard of his people and cut his own throat and just leave himself there, and that I cannot allow that. Sorry, I actually had to load the game and I had to redo that because I don't want him to die. I mean, he's a troll and he feels very forced upon. I'm not sure what the words I'm looking for are, but deep down I liked him and I wanted to see him happy again. So to see him either go to the Hanar homeworld and live like a king if you don't make peace with Liara, that's a pretty happy ending. But if you do make peace with Liara, he goes on a book writing tour with her, and honestly, if you don't romance Liara, I can actually see a romance happening between Liara and Javik. Veyron, if you're listening to this, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to spoil your waifu. So please forgive me. Anyway, going on.
He evolves from seeing the primitives as nameless assets to use against the Reapers to understand what peace feels like after the war is over, overcoming the trauma of what he experienced during the previous cycle, and along the way he learns about the value of empathy, kindness, and understanding. He evolves from seeing the primitives as nameless assets to use against the Reapers to individual people with hopes, families, and lives. In spite of being from an advanced civilization far beyond their understanding, he learns to view the primitives as equals to him. Of all the squad mates in Mass Effect 3, Javik is the one who goes through a three-dimensional character arc, making him the most three-dimensional in the game. In a way, Javik was pretty much the reason I was able to get through Mass Effect 3 at all. If it wasn't for him, I most likely would have just given up and stopped playing entirely, especially since the villain of this game is more or less a clone of a villain from the first one. I get that Mass Effect 3 was met with a lot of positive reception, and it still is, and I completely understand why people feel that way. But there were just so many horrible storytelling moments, and so many things that just kept building up into bigger and bigger problems. Some people will probably say I had unfair expectations of this game, but if that's the argument you want to use, I'm not the only one who had expectations for Mass Effect 3. It's not like we were in the wrong mindset when we went into this game. Mass Effect is not Kingdom Hearts or Gears of War. It is a purely story-driven video game experience. And
Exactly. People praise the third game for its combat, but it was not the combat that got the game sold. It was its story quality.
And as an experience driven by its writing, lore, world-building, characters, choices made by the player, and consequences for the player's actions, people were expecting these things to be represented faithfully like they were in the first two games. You can make the argument that this game's negative reception was a result of high expectations, but if that's the only argument you want to use, you're missing the bigger problem here. Let me put it this way. Even if I never played the first two games, that wouldn't erase the numerous plot holes, terrible pacing, and bad writing decisions that went into this game. Because believe it or not, BioWare made Mass Effect 3 as both a sequel and as an introduction for new players. So BioWare developed this game with the mindset that they wanted people to have Mass Effect 3 be their first Mass Effect game. A series where the most important part of the entire franchise is the story. In other words, you're jumping into this massive world and massive story without any context for anything that came before. That's the equivalent of Marvel Studios wanting Avengers Endgame to be people's first MCU movie. You don't start reading a book by skipping to the final chapter of the story. You're skipping a lot, and I mean a lot of vital information that you need to understand anything that's going on.
That explains why there's so much exposition in this game. If I would calculate that at least a quarter of all the dialogue in the game was rehashing stuff we already know. So the characters don't have room to develop because we're instead rehashing what we've already talked about in the previous games. And it reminds me of a quote by Sarge in Red vs. Blue. I don't remember the exact words. It's typing it in a memo or something like that. The one I use that I made up would be, do you mind filing that in a folder labeled shit I already know? See, if I use that quote many times when playing Mass Effect 3 for the first time, because they're just repeating themselves.
Mass Effect is a series that acts as a choose-your-own-adventure book. You need to play the first two games in order to properly connect with anything that's happening. Otherwise, you're thrown into this confusing scenario where everyone talks to your character like you know each other when you clearly don't. And I know what you might be thinking. What about the Genesis DLC? This was a feature BioWare added as a means to recap the story in the form of a series of comic strips. On a surface level, it does seem like the right idea. If someone is playing Mass Effect 3 without knowing anything that happened in 1 and 2, they would want a recap to understand what led up to this game. On paper, it's a well-intended idea, but in execution, this does not work. BioWare's solution to introducing newcomers with Mass Effect 3 was to condense 60+ hours worth of events into 22 minutes. The comic only covers a very small handful of events, and the choices given to the player are extremely limited. It doesn't bother to cover a lot of important details like deciding whether or not to reserve Malin's data, whether or not Tali was exiled from her people, whether or not you chose to save the Geth heretics, whether or not you had your ship and squad fully prepared before going into the Omega-4 relay, at least prior to the Normandy crew getting kidnapped to immediately rescue them and get the best ending where everyone lives. It gives you the illusion of player choice while forcing you on a set path. Now you have a playthrough where regardless if you set your character to be a full-on Paragon, you have a campaign where you didn't save Malin's data and Eve dies. Also, the comic forces you to choose between killing half your squad and killing the Normandy crew regardless of your readiness rating. Apparently it doesn't take the ship upgrades into account, so you have the choice to have a fully upgraded ship and immediately go save them. Which is bullshit since Mass Effect 2 does give you the option to save everyone with a fully upgraded ship. Unless you have a save file for both Mass Effect 1 and 2, you might as well not even bother. The Genesis DLC does very little to include the full story of the first two games while leaving out vital parts of the plot, forcing you to start with an incomplete experience. But that's not the only stupid thing that happens as a result of BioWare trying to make Mass Effect 3 more accessible to newcomers. You want to know what you don't do when you're making a video game driven by its story? Give the player the option to not make it story driven. Seriously, they give you the option to not only make the game action focused, but they also give you the option to turn off dialogue options.
Yeah, I was shocked when I saw that option when I clicked New Game on Mass Effect 3. I was shocked. What is this? What's the it's linear conversations without choices? So what will the choices be? All Paragon, all Renegade, what? So I was shocked and worried about what this would mean, how it would affect the story.
And focus, but they also give you the option to turn off dialogue options. Dialogue options, where the entire appeal of Mass Effect is choosing your character's dialogue to customize their personality. It's almost as if they wanted to make Mass Effect 3 less like a Mass Effect game just to draw in casual players. They weren't making the story their top priority and seemed to be more concerned with drawing in as many people as possible to increase sales. Sacrificing integrity in exchange for profit is never a good idea, because somewhere down the line people are going to notice how horribly your product aged like milk, as is the case for the many things we'll be going over in this video. The story starts with Shepard being escorted to a meeting with the Defense Committee of Earth, and right from the very beginning you can see signs this game isn't working right. Admittedly, it's difficult to pick up during a first viewing, but let's see if you can figure it out in this scene.
What else could it be? If I knew that.
You know we're not ready if it is then. Not by a long shot.
No, how about this scene?
But there must be some way.
I noticed it almost immediately, but then again, I forgave it because Mass Effect 2 also has moments where there's only two options available. But to be fair, those options made sense because you had the neutral option and either a Renegade or a Paragon option because there was nothing positive or negative to say about the situation. For example, when the Normandy is being attacked and is on fire, thanks to the collectors at the beginning of the second game, you have only the neutral option and the Renegade option. You don't have a Paragon option because, to be fair, there's nothing positive to say about the situation. The ship's on fire, it's going down, people are dying and or getting to the pods, and so, yeah, I can forgive Mass Effect 2 having limited choices at certain times. But Mass Effect 3... giving me only giving me only two options, regardless of the situation. No neutral option, which it's not just neutral, it cuts to the point much faster.
There must be some way.
If we're gonna have any chance at surviving this, we have to stand together.
Still not getting it? Let's try one more.
I'm not going. You saw those men back there. There's a million more like them, and they need a leader.
We're in this fight together, Anderson.
If you haven't figured it out, the problem is that the role-playing aspect, which was vital to the series, is severely downsized. Throughout the game you have all these cutscenes where instead of giving the player a wider variety of dialogue options, all you have is two. Either a Paragon choice or a Renegade choice with nothing in between. A lot of Shepard's dialogue is automatic, resulting in freedom being taken away from the player. Instead of gathering information and making decisions based on that info, you just pick whether to play good cop or bad cop.
Well, the bigger problem with the auto dialogue is how often it makes Shepard look like an idiot. Shepard is supposed to be the one who knows that the Reapers are going to destroy the whole galaxy, and the loss of one planet is insignificant compared to the loss of the whole galaxy, as Javik would say. And yet and the only way to defeat the Reapers would be through unity. And so we got to go to the Citadel to rally the races together. So when Anderson tells us initially to go to the Citadel, one of the most stupid and cringeworthy things I've ever heard Shepard say gets said right then and there. Shepard says, "The Citadel? The fight is here." Wait. So what happened? Are you some ignorant, stupid private who doesn't know that the Reapers are going to destroy the whole galaxy? You think they're just going to go after Earth? No, they're going after the whole kaboom, the whole thing, the whole shebang. So what's with you saying the fight is here, as if one little infantryman can make a difference? No, stupid. You got to go to the Citadel to rally everyone. Use your charisma and your reputation, your leadership. But no, it's yeah, that was, oh man. And of course, there's also the, what was that other option? Oh yeah, when Hackett points out that the Yogg homeworld is not being attacked by the Reapers, Shepard automatically says that that's because the Yogg have teeth. Are you stupid or something? Have you forgotten the fact that the Reapers only target planets of races that are spacefaring? Seriously, what happened to you? But I admit Mass Effect 3 also violates that lore as well by having the what are the harvesters? They huskify the harvesters. Why? The harvesters aren't a sentient race. They aren't spacefaring, and yet they're being converted into Reaper husks as well. That one I wasn't able to understand at all. And if you're going to huskify the harvesters, why not go after the Clixen as well, which are kind of like the Rachni, but they have very well, there's something in their bodies. They're able to mix chemicals together and form flamethrowers inside their bodies. It's kind of weird. But yeah, huskify them as well. It's too bad that they don't appear in the third game, along with the Scions and the Praetorians and the Abominations. The game campaign feels kind of empty in those parts.
It's insultingly linear when the first two games offered more dialogue options and branching paths for conversations, especially considering the middle dialogue branch is almost always absent during key situations.
What do you mean almost always? It always is absent. The one facing the left, it doesn't really count. I'm talking about the ones facing the right. There's not a single instance where the middle option is present.
Almost always absent during key situations. Like, imagine if the focus on Sovereign option was removed during the end of Mass Effect 1. It would simplify the player's dialogue.
And before you say that let the Council die and concentrate on Sovereign are the same thing, the way I see it, concentrate on Sovereign means that you're sorry to sacrifice the Council. You don't want to sacrifice them, but you've got no other choice. Whereas let the Council die is because you actually don't care about them and you probably do want them to die. So granted, the options are the same. The dialogue, the choice of words that comes afterwards is the same. But like I said earlier, it's the reluctance or the eagerness. I'm not sure what the right word is. But go on. Sorry about that.
Options instead of giving them a greater sense of freedom. Even if you want to make the argument it has the same result as let the Council die, that's not what's being discussed here. The middle choice, the one that allows you to choose a path between Paragon and Renegade, is nearly non-existent in Mass Effect 3, taking away the more neutral aspects of Shepard's personality. It boggles my mind as to why BioWare thought this was a good idea in a series driven by player decision. Simplifying the dialogue wheel and making a large amount of cutscenes play with auto-dialogue takes away from the role-playing aspect that made Mass Effect famous. It would be one thing if this auto-dialogue was playing during a battle or an action scene, but Mass Effect 3 has so many points in its story where the player should have input but they don't get to have it. You might as well replace the dialogue wheel with the left or right sign since it would be just as valid. So Shepard and Anderson are talking about a couple of things that happened in between Mass Effect 2 and 3, one of which being the destruction of Aratok at the end of Arrival. Now, if you were like me, you were expecting this to come back in a big way. The rivalry between humans and Batarians was established as early as Bring Down the Sky in Mass Effect 1. The Batarians hated humanity, more so than any other species in the galaxy. Then you have the Arrival DLC where a human blew up a Batarian system and killed everyone inside. You'd imagine the Batarians would consider this an act of terrorism, an act of war. When I first had that conversation with Admiral Hackett, it gave me goosebumps. All that foreshadowing of a brewing conflict between the humans and Batarians and how it would play a key role in the coming war with the Reapers, it just left me with chills. I was expecting some kind of epic story-based mission where Shepard had to redeem themselves and gain the trust of the Batarians, putting their life on the line to convince them to side with the galaxy to fight against the Reapers. Too bad it's never brought up again. Yeah, they just briefly referenced the Arrival DLC, and that's literally it.
It honestly feels like the Arrival DLC was put there for simply to give Mass Effect 3 justification for having Shepard under arrest, because the original reason is simply quote-unquote working with Cerberus, which was bullshit, not good enough. No reason for Shepard to turn himself in at all. I actually started playing Mass Effect 3 before I played the Arrival DLC, because I didn't know how to install DLC back in 2010 or 2011. So I started Mass Effect 3 and I realized, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. So perhaps I have to get the DLC. So I went around and got the DLC, replayed the ending of Mass Effect 2, and realized, okay, so this is why? Okay, so why isn't it part of Mass Effect 2 in the first place? Why is it an optional DLC? It doesn't make any sense. So, yeah.
There's no mission where you go to the Batarian homeworld, no mission where Shepard does anything to redeem themselves to the Batarian people. They just say, remember when this happened, and just mosey along.
And another thing, I think I've said earlier that one of the countless things I hate about Mass Effect 3 is how there are so many. About half of all the missions in Mass Effect 3 are basically launch probe equals mission complete. One of them includes the rescuing of a Batarian governor who wants to make peace between humans and Batarians. And honestly, that mission should have been a real mission, not the launching of a probe. Because having a Batarian who's got a good opinion about humans, like Bray does, who works for Aria, that would have been, well, a big important thing. That should have been a mission. So, anyway, sorry about the interruption.
The fact that Shepard blew up a Batarian system that could be seen as an act of war never comes back. I get that the arrival was optional content that a lot of people wouldn't have access to, so the story of Mass Effect 3 would be largely made without arrival in mind, but there should have been more for people who did purchase the DLC. Giving us all that foreshadowing, all those warnings of a conflict between humans and Batarians, and then finding out it doesn't actually matter is such an insult for the time people put into this content. Alright, so after that, we move forward and we have our meeting with the Defense Committee, and what follows is the first sign that this story is in big trouble. Apparently, the Alliance is shocked that the Reapers are coming despite that we've been warning them for 2 games, and yet they made 0 preparations to fight them. They accumulated no tactical data and didn't make any super weapons salvaged from Sovereign's remains.
Are we boned?
Yeah, we're boned.
What the hell is wrong with you idiots? The Alliance military, the very same one that fought Sovereign at the end of the first game, made no preparations for this threat. A lot of people criticize Mass Effect 2 for not being about looking for a way to stop the Reapers, and after seeing this I better understand where those criticisms were coming from. Why would the Council, the Alliance, or any other force in the galaxy not take the time to make preparations for the Reaper invasion?
Well, let's see. Another thing that bothers me, and I know that, the politicians dismissed us, but the Citadel DLC reveals that the Council actually did believe us, but still remained in denial, which makes the opening all the more nonsensical. And of course, the auto dialogue does not allow you to rub it in. I really wanted to say, I told you so, and you didn't believe me, but unfortunately, the game does not allow me to do that. And, let's see. Well, Mass Effect 3 establishes that it takes years to build ships, and therefore, the Alliance did not have the time or resources to rebuild the lost ships. Or the Council races didn't have the time to rebuild the lost ships, depending on who you sacrifice to fight Sovereign. Mass Effect Andromeda completely retcons all of that, because the Andromeda Initiative supposedly starts after Mass Effect 1 and departs before Mass Effect 2, which means we are capable of building 4 massive arcs capable of housing 20,000 people, as well as a Diet Citadel, and giving them the capability to travel to another galaxy, all in less than 2 years. If we could have done all that, we could easily have built new fleets. We could have built 1,000 dreadnoughts with the amount of resources that we put in the Diet Citadel alone. But instead, we, Mass Effect 3 has what it has, and then Mass Effect Andromeda retcons it all. So now we have a series of big contradictions. It's infuriating.
You're seriously going to dismiss that claim when you needed me to save your sorry ass from a Reaper? And even then, they didn't even bother to come up with any kind of strategy. Instead, you're relying on Shepard in spite of their inexperience in this field. Yeah, they led a suicide mission in Mass Effect 2, but that's a really small-scale situation compared to the Reapers. Also, there's this.
What do we do?
The only thing we can. We fight, or we die.
Shepard just said we fight or we die, but just a second ago they said this isn't about strategy and tactics. I'm pretty sure that fighting largely involves strategy and tactics. In the span of 2 minutes, Shepard is an idiot contradicting themselves, and yet we're supposed to leave the fate of the galaxy in their hands. There's a lot of people who may call this nitpicking, a single bit of dialogue that can easily be ignored, and I might have been willing to believe that if it wasn't for the fact that this is a problem that is painfully present throughout the game. There are so many moments where the dialogue just nosedives straight into the realm of inconsistent, like when Anderson says Shepard blew up Sovereign, but they didn't even fight Sovereign, they fought Saren. The Alliance blew Sovereign up. Consistency, it's important for a reason. This is the equivalent of Rian Johnson being paid millions of dollars to direct Mark Hamill to say the word unfindable.
One last thing about the Citadel dismissing, let's see, what was it? Oh, yeah, Mass Effect Andromeda. Basically, I was hoping for an actual war instead of a usual cliche one-sided slaughter. That's one of the things I didn't like about the War of the Worlds movies, because in the book, the army was able to actually shoot back and take down some of the alien ships with their cannons before the aliens fought back and wiped out their attackers. And then, of course, the disease finished them off. But War of the Worlds makes it all the two movies made it a one-sided slaughter. And unfortunately, Independence Day, as much as I love Independence Day, also follow that same thing. A one-sided slaughter. I wanted no shields. Get rid of the shields and let there be an actual war instead of a one-sided slaughter. Well, unfortunately, Mass Effect 3 followed the same thing. I was hoping for an actual war because we do prepare for the Reapers. And, well, the Reapers lose because they lost several critical advantages that they've always had. And I thought that would have made a huge difference, but nope.
Present throughout the game. There are so many moments where the dialogue just nosedives straight into the realm of inconsistent, like when Anderson says Shepard blew up Sovereign.
One more thing. The we fight or we die, I don't know why, I can't put my finger on it, but there's something very cringy about it. I don't know why. I don't know what it is. I just hate it. Can someone tell me down in the comments why we hate it? I don't know why.
But they didn't even fight Sovereign, they fought Saren. The Alliance blew Sovereign up. Consistency, it's important for a reason. This is the equivalent of Rian Johnson being paid millions of dollars to direct Mark Hamill to say the word unfindable. It feels like this dialogue was written by a child, and it just feels off when the first two games had a more consistent tone. After that, the Reapers arrive and start blowing stuff up, and we're thrown right into the gameplay with all our abilities available to us. You know how Kingdom Hearts 3 made Sora overpowered in the very first world by giving him all his powers and abilities by the end of the Olympus storyline? Well, you can blame Mass Effect 3 for popularizing that stupidity. It's another example of how BioWare chose to focus on action over narrative consistency. This is the moment we've been building up to for years. The Reapers have arrived, the invasion has begun, the cycle of extinction is at hand. But instead of being immersed in the tension of the situation, we are more focused on firing infinite ammo into the distance, melee bashing enemy heads, and spamming biotic superpowers. There should have been a slower build-up to the invasion, and a more progressive method of giving the player access to Shepard's abilities. The invasion of Earth should have only included basic movement controls, saving combat tutorials for the Mars mission.
I will partly and respectfully disagree. We must not treat Shepard like he is a newbie having to learn his skills all over again. He's not just a soldier who passed through boot camp. He's an N7. The N7 are the best of the best. They're even supposed to be better than the Navy SEALs of today. And the Navy SEALs are so intense that no woman has ever actually passed them. And same thing with the Army Rangers, although there was some cheating going on behind the doors that we're not allowed to talk about. But putting that aside, treating Shepard like a newbie would not work. But if you're talking about him exercising his powers by not delaying him access to his abilities, by not having the enemy show up, okay, I can totally understand that. Oh, and another thing that you're not allowed to, that you didn't point out in this video, if you look closely at the people fleeing down below, you'll notice that they are all tiny microscopic Jack clones. They are all Jack, basically. Jack and her clothing from the Grissom Academy. It's kind of weird.
That way, instead of getting distracted by flashy combat, we'd be able to feel more immersed in the characters and world. All this amounts to is Shepard talking about wanting to stay on Earth while Anderson talks about the importance of forming alliances. It reduces the prologue into a collection of action-based set pieces instead of fleshing out the scenario, reducing the agency in the plot. And it also brings me to question why the Reapers are killing off humanity if they're needed to form a new Reaper. Wasn't the idea supposed to be harvesting organic life? How are you harvesting humanity by blowing up ships and buildings, killing everyone inside? That's like saving an endangered species by gathering up their remaining numbers and having a bunch of poachers sick on them. I really don't know how you're helping. It's also the beginning of that stupid plot point that follows us throughout the game. How Mass Effect 3 is all about taking Earth back like it's suddenly the most important planet in the galaxy in spite of the galactic annihilation thing.
Amen about that, but the thing that I was going to point out, I forgot to mention, yeah, I was blown away by how poor a job BioWare did was in making me feel sorry for the civilian population. You know, civilians are either not present at all or they're very rare. And yet, 4 years before, the game Homefront, the infamous Homefront game with its pathetically tiny campaign, it did an absolutely superb job in making me feel sorry for the civilian population. I believe that should have been what we saw on Earth. Actual civilian suffering, but we don't get to have that. And yet we're supposed to talk about taking Earth back and suffering, yet I don't see it. So yeah, it's Mass Effect 3, BioWare, you blew it. And it's worse now because you kicked out everybody now who've made the first two games.
Taking Earth back like it's suddenly the most important planet in the galaxy in spite of the galactic annihilation thing. And trust me, you're gonna be seeing this a lot. It's practically a running gag with how ridiculous it is. Shepard is constantly talking about taking Earth back and how it's somehow the most important part of the war, like there's anything left to save given how fast Earth is being destroyed. Maybe you can make the argument that if you chose the Earthborn background this is personal for them, but even then that's a really big stretch. Why does Shepard suddenly put so much emphasis on saving Earth when the entire galaxy is at stake?
Exactly. I quickly grew tired of the whole take Earth back shtick within minutes of me playing because my focus is destroying the Reapers. Save everybody else. Save everybody, not just Earth. And if anything, as a guy who has been mistreated by his fellow humans, I think I'd be more interested in saving Thessia than Earth, to tell you the truth.
I think Javik said it best.
The loss of a planet is insignificant next to the loss of the galaxy.
Why'd they allow him to say that, I wonder? This game would allow him to say that, even though it's not about planet Earth. It is planet Earth, yet it's not. It's weird. It's confusing.
It's stick. I think Javik said it best.
The loss of a planet is insignificant next to the loss of the galaxy.
Anyway, as you proceed, you eventually come across the kid who was playing with his toy during the intro. This kid somehow teleported from the roof of this building into the air duct of another building without a single explanation for how he got there. Now, this was supposed to be the beginning of Shepard's indoctrination. You know, that theory that a lot of people use to rationalize the stupid stuff in this game? Well, considering that BioWare chose to say the indoctrination theory wasn't real, there is literally no explanation for how this kid got here except magic bullshit. I mean, if this really is the Star Child from the ending, why is he here now? Does he have the power to shapeshift his form to look like a human child? Can the Catalyst just take the form of anything he wants? Why does he have the form of a human child? Did the Leviathan give the intelligence the ability to shapeshift into human children to manipulate Shepard? Yeah, I think it's safe to say the DLC just made this story stupider.
Amen. The kid alone is supposed to represent the entire civilian population, yet his stupid face and his stupid dialogue and his stupid inclusion pretty much destroyed all feeling of goodwill towards the civilian population. And I was initially thinking, when I first played all those years ago, over a decade ago, was that maybe the kid really is a hallucination because the kid is crawling backwards. He is somehow able to go backwards 10 feet and disappear around the corner without making a noise, without making a single sound in the span of 2 seconds when Shepard turns away. It's stupid. I honestly thought he was a hallucination. And of course, when he tries to get aboard the shuttle, none of the other civilians pull him in. Nobody grabs him and pulls him in. He's the only child in a place full of adults. People right and left are helping each other into the shuttles, but the kid is helping himself. Nobody grabs the kid, throws him into the shuttle, which would have happened. But the people are acting like he's not there. It's like they don't see him. But anyway.
Eventually you make your way outside where you have to defend your position from Reaper ground troops until the Normandy comes to save you. There's just one problem. You see, this segment doesn't end after Shepard kills a certain amount of enemies or after a certain amount of time passes. Instead, it's tied to your ammo count. The Normandy only arrives when Shepard uses up all of their ammo, so out of curiosity I looked up a clip of someone just using up their ammo from behind cover, never killing any enemies during this whole encounter. So you mean I can just skip this section at any time by mindlessly shooting at the ground? Well, that doesn't take the suspense out of the situation at all, does it? God damn it, Call of Duty did this better than you! Okay, well, after the Normandy comes for you, you prepare to leave when Anderson claims he needs to stay behind and lead the people of Earth. But what's the point? Why is he staying to fight for Earth? Maybe it would make sense if Anderson was staying to help people evacuate Earth, but that's not what's being implied. The reason he's staying on Earth is because he wants to lead the forces against the Reapers. It feels like an excuse to give Anderson a heroic moment, but there's no logical follow-up to it. There's no strategy to staying on Earth. You need to gather allies and alliances. Why are we even supposed to care about Earth at all? This prologue failed to establish anything significant about it. All we see is that teleporting Starchild that the player doesn't know or care about, and a defense committee that confirms how the Alliance was completely useless and unreliable. Maybe if we had been to Earth at some point before this moment, but we never get to explore Earth directly in either of the first two games. This is just making taking Earth back the focal point of the story for the sake of marketing. This entire prologue is just mindless nonsense on top of action set pieces. It's clear that BioWare made it this way to draw in casual players and newcomers, but from a storytelling standpoint, it makes no sense. Like, imagine if this opening mission really was your first exposure to Mass Effect. You'd have no idea what's going on, where we are, how we got here, or what any of these characters are saying, or doing, or why. And even as someone who does have context from the first two games, the pacing is unbelievably choppy. You're introduced to entirely new characters who aren't properly established, and yet you interact with them like you've known them since the first game. The game just thrusts you into mindless action sequences instead of allowing you to get immersed in the setting. And in spite of Earth having no important place in the story up to this point, saving it is made the top priority. Nothing about this opening mission does anything to properly set up the rest of the story. It's far too rushed, and even then, the dialogue is completely incompetent, with characters doing stupid things and saying stupid things for stupid reasons. And unfortunately, it only gets worse from there.
Oh yeah. So yeah, there's no way I'm going to give a verbal response to a video that's 2.5 hours long. Otherwise we're going to be sitting here for 5 hours. So please like the button and hit the like button. I'm going to include links to the full version and the uninterrupted part 1, as well as a link to the original creator's new profile. So yep, hit the like button, subscribe, and drink plenty of water, sleep well, tell your mom that you love her, even if she's kind of mean, and definitely appreciate your father. Your father was a very important man, whether you knew it or not. So, well, take care, y'all.